Welcome to Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where we delve into the untold stories and experiences surrounding abortion. Stories often missing from everyday conversations, media reports, and even other podcast interviews. I'm your host, Melissa Ohden, the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network. As the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, I've had the privilege of hearing the most powerful stories from some of the most resilient and courageous individuals. These stories and these people have profoundly transformed my life, and I believe they have the power to transform yours as well. Together, we will amplify these voices, share the truths that they illuminate, and challenge our culture to recognize what life is truly like beyond abortion. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Life Beyond Abortion, where I have the distinct opportunity to highlight experiences and voices of those who have experiences that really challenge the predominant narrative about abortion in our culture. And today I get to introduce you to someone who is sort of up and coming in the pro-life movement. I think I can say this, even though I know that he's been involved for, quite some time, but I can tell you that he is shaking some things up in a very good way and ensuring that we start having more conversations about how abortion impacts men and how we do more to include men in abortion healing and really shifting and changing our culture. So today I want to introduce you to the head of Men for Life, Sean Corcoran. Sean, exact title is executive director, CEO, dad extraordinaire, husband, all the things. You start there.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. I'm excited to be here. So my title is CEO of Men for Life, but I oftentimes say it differently too. Sometimes it's just easier to say I'm the director.
Right.
I'm also
Sometimes
the janitor, so it's one of those things.
Yeah, the greatest volunteer sometimes.
That's right.
Well, and you have been involved in the pro-life movement. You were involved with Men for Life before. People may recognize the name for it and kind of go, yeah, I might have heard something about them, but you really have taken things to the next level. I love TJ and what he did with Men for Life, but you have really amplified, I think, the platform for Men for Life. So before we talk about what you do at Men for Life, let's talk about what's brought you to this place and working to change our culture. What's your abortion story and what does life look like beyond abortion for you, Sean?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So, I lost my first child to abortion when I was 19 years old. I was away at college and I was just told this is what's happening. I fought against it to the point where even my family, my father came to town and offered to adopt the baby. We tried everything that we could think of to stop the abortion and we lost, because nothing that I said, nothing that I did, nothing that I felt mattered is the way that it came across. And then that was compounded when the young lady had, who was struggling as well after the abortion, went and talked to the counselors and the school counselors, helped her to waive some classes so that she wouldn't be, her GPA wouldn't be impacted. She'd be able to continue, and I went and talked to the same counselors after she told me that. And they basically said, no, this doesn't affect you. So that's two different people telling me that nothing that I said mattered and that it didn't affect me. But it did affect me. And I ended up failing out of college. I moved home to Louisiana and started school at a new college, failed out of that college 2 more times. And so I failed out of 2 colleges 3 times. And by 2005, so 8 years after the abortion, I was at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, homeless, unemployed, overdosing in a hotel room and waiting for the police to come and arrest me. And at no point during that 8-year period did I make any connection to this is what happened and that precipitated the destructive behaviors and the destructive behaviors, because it didn't affect me, right? That's what I was told. It didn't affect me. And so, December 13th, 2005, dying in that hotel room and just praying really at that point, God, I want you to help me through this because I don't want to embarrass my family by being found here dead of an overdose. And that was it. Like, I'd already prayed all my prayers, and there was no reason for me to believe that God believed my prayers anymore. But, for my family's sake, it was really important that that not be like my last way out, right? And so, and he answered them. And the next day I woke up and the police hadn't come, and my head was super clear for the first time in 7 years. And I was able to find a pamphlet for a treatment center that was shoved in my truck, that I've been living out of, and it'd been in there for several years, just shoved behind the seat. And I called, and they were able to get me in that day. So I drove this beat up truck to about 3.5 hours through a national forest. I started hitting some hills when I got to the town that the treatment center was in, and this truck started shaking. It hadn't had an oil change. It hadn't had maintenance in about 5 years. And I was just praying, God, let me make it to the treatment center. And that's exactly what he did. And I pulled into the parking lot of the treatment center, and that truck broke down and had to be pushed into a parking spot. And so I was safe, right? Like, for the first time in 7 years, I was safe, and I knew that there was nowhere I could go, and there was nothing I could do. I didn't have a phone because I never paid my bill. So this is where I needed to be. And it was in that treatment center that the counselors, as they were walking me through my life, said, hey, we should really talk about this abortion. And it was the first time that anybody had said that. And it makes sense looking at it objectively that everything was on an upward trajectory. The abortion happened, everything crashed. But because of how I was told to feel about it, I didn't think about it. And so in treatment, they helped me to heal. They helped me to forgive myself. They helped me to write letters forgiving the mother of my child. They helped me to ask for forgiveness from my son, to name him Michael, and to really begin that healing. But the one thing they didn't tell me was that I was not alone. And so then I went another 8 years before I talked about it again. I went from treatment, I went back to college. I went to law school. I started a legal career. I got married to a woman I'd been pursuing for 7 years. And we started a family. And it wasn't until 2013 on a retreat, when men were sharing their stories about all these crazy things that had happened in their lives, just the hardest thing they'd ever dealt with, and nobody was judging them at all. And I realized, hey, I can unload everything here, and nobody is going to judge me. And so I did. And it was very healing, but it wasn't about me, because right after I shared, I had 3 different men come up to me privately and say, I haven't told anybody this in 20 years or 30 years. One of them, not even his spouse, but I lost a child to abortion when I was in college, or whenever it may have been. And at that point, I realized that it wasn't about me. I wasn't the only one who thought that I was the only one, and that's how the devil works, right? Like, shut us down, isolate us, silence us so that we believe that we're alone in our grief. And he's doing that to each of us. And so at that point, I realized that I have to share. So I started sharing my story locally. And at an event here, Men for Life was there. Somebody from Men for Life must have been there and heard me. And so when I stopped practicing law in 2021 and really shut it down in 2022, they started asking me if I would come and run Men for Life.
And, there's so much that I want to kind of jump off to talk about, but the whole concept that you're talking about, Sean, and I know you and I have talked about this in various, interviews and other places before too, but I think there is something very relatable for anyone, whether they've been touched by abortion or maybe it's something else they've gone through in their life, that the enemy loves for us to sit in a place of shame and isolation. And, we hear those whispers of, what, you are the only person who has ever gone through this. Don't ever talk about it. Nobody wants to hear from you. You're responsible for any of this. Anything that's happened as a result of it, that's on you, right? And so we have these like shackles of shame that just keep building. And, I'm curious if you could name, one or two things in treatment that you felt were the most helpful for you in addressing shame. What would that be?
Yeah, I think you know that's a great question, and I think that approaching it from two different places, because I wasn't in treatment for abortion, right? I wasn't there for that, but I was there with surrounded by other people who, just like in this instance, who had been dealing with their own demons on their own and gotten themselves in this position on their own. But now we're all dealing with it together, and so that community of recognition that we're not alone, right? That helped me to heal from that standpoint. Just the acknowledgement by the counselor that that as a father, like losing my child is a big deal, and that it makes sense that I would grieve, and it makes sense that I would struggle, and it would make sense that that I had a right to all of that. I think that was the biggest thing. I think that it was. I think that was what was the most important. And so, drawing on that, that community aspect of of healing, I think is a part of what we're working on now, because I think that's so important. And a lot of what I draw the work that I'm doing, Men for Life, is on my experience in addiction recovery. Because addiction is an isolating event. You get to a point, whether it's purposeful or not. I was isolated. I was homeless, and I was in a hotel room alone because I destroyed every relationship that I had, and that's what addicts do. And so through that process, it becomes an isolation, and you're just dealing with it by yourself. And it's very similar in that sense to to feeling like you're the only one who's experienced what you're experiencing in anything, but in abortion as a man, especially. Even pro-life men don't talk about abortion.
Right. I mean, I can't even tell you. I mean, there has to be not a single event that I speak at or go to where a man doesn't share his experience, right? I've spent nearly 20 years with men whispering their stories to me. And sometimes, right, their wife can be right there and they'll kind of pull and say, hey, I haven't even told her, but. And, I'm curious, Sean, what you think the precipitating factors are, not only that were impacting you when you lost your son to abortion at the age of 19, but, maybe sort of like what stood true back then and is still happening now that lead men to be in that position where people by and large still aren't talking about it. But yet when you do, then where do you go?
Yeah. So as far as men not talking about it, I think that it comes from both sides, right? It comes from the pro-abortion side, it comes from the pro-life side, and it's changing dramatically just now. The momentum is very big right now on the pro-life side, but for that 53 years since Roe versus Wade, the abortion industry is saying, sit down, shut up, stay on the sidelines. You're not allowed to talk about this. This is a women's issue. It's about reproductive health. You don't know anything about this. You have no right to speak. And at the same time, the pro-life side, hyper focused on women and babies as they should have been, overlooked the other side of the equation, right? So while one side is screaming to sit down and shut up, no one's calling the men to speak, and I'm very clear that it's not up to the women in the pro-life movement to call the men to action. That is a failure of masculinity on the part of the men to not recognize the destruction to our society that was happening through abortion and not stand up and do something on our own. But that's the reality of the situation. That's what happened. And so, like I said, there is a shift, and it's a big shift. There's a reason that God called me out of practicing law at the time that he did. There's a reason that God allowed me to say no to Men for Life for almost 2 years before finally accepting the position. And there's a reason that God has continued to validate the work that I'm doing and continued to put amazing people in front of me where I can have these conversations and really develop Men for Life in a way that can help everyone else that's working to have a real impact on calling men to action.
Yeah, and I love that, first of all, I appreciate your boldness in saying, hey, you know what, the abortion industry and their lobby has right effectively shut men down for 53 plus years, but at the same time, like, we have our own stuff to own in the pro-life movement. Not that people purposely created this situation, it just sort of happened, right? Because when the abortion industry and lobby is screaming about women's rights the way that they do, then we have had to spend, 53 plus years focusing on women and really shining a light on that area. The more, they are kind of combating that way, we have had to keep saying, no, we're pro-women, pro-life. And the implicit, right, response is, oh yeah, we're also pro-men. We know that, but unwittingly, what we were doing was creating a situation where there was no true leadership leading men to say, hey, man, I see you, and there's a place for you, and I'm going to lead you. And maybe I'm wrong on this one, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like men are just looking for the person who's leading. Men will go, that men are called to action. You are innately are driven to act, but you're looking for the person who's leading you.
Right. Like, if nobody's doing it, then it's way easier to sit back and do it. And if the only people that are fighting are women, and I made this comparison on a call a little while ago, but if the only people that are fighting it are women, then men have kind of consigned ourselves to being supportive in the sense of, yes, I will come with you to the banquet. Yes, I will come with you to the march. Yes, I will write the check, right, to support your woman's issue. And, and I made the comparison to women's suffrage, right? It's almost like when women were fighting for the right to vote, and the husbands were like, okay, go off to your women's march. Here's the money you need. And that's not enough, right? Like, this isn't a women's issue. This is a societal issue. And it is an epidemic of failed leadership among men to sit back and allow babies and women and men to be destroyed by abortion. And it is like, it is, obviously babies are being destroyed, over 1 million a year in America. Women are being destroyed by abortion. There's a reason that so many women in the pro-life movement have an abortion story, right? Like, people aren't like having abortions and then staying out of it. Like, they're feeling it. And it may take a year, it may take 10 years, it may take 20 years, but they're coming out, and those are the people who are so active in the pro-life movement, and it's because it's got a huge negative impact. And then we've got the statistics on suicide is the easiest one to remember, right? That there's a dozen studies now that show that. And meta-analyses that show that women who have had an abortion are 2 to 6 times more likely to commit suicide. And I think it's really important that we differentiate the word commit to the word attempt, okay? Because overall, in society, women attempt suicide more than men. Men are successful, they commit suicide more than women. So it's important that in this case, what we're saying is, these women who have had abortions, who are 2 to 5 times more likely, not just to attempt 2 to 6 times, not just to attempt suicide, but to actually succeed. That is a big deal. And look, I have to talk about this because this is something that keeps coming up when I bring that up. The pro-abortion side inevitably thinks that they've got a gotcha moment and will respond to that information with, well, yes, but we know that women who have abortions are in, and then they list all these terrible circumstances, right? And or broken, like these women are broken. They come from a place of brokenness. Otherwise, they wouldn't have an abortion. And these are pro-abortion people saying this. To which my response, obviously, is if you can admit that the people who are having abortions are broken, and rather than try to help them fix the brokenness, you are driving them somewhere that will increase their potential for brokenness, then we're failing as a society. And then they back off of it and they're like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Because if I say that, then I'm wrong about everything. And yes, you're wrong about everything.
Right. Well, and it's, as we were talking about addiction, right? It would be like saying to an addict, hey, listen, I know your past history. I understand. But hey, I'm going to put this in front of you because, well, I mean, why not? You're already broken, right? You've lived this life. I mean, I have no other solutions for you except more brokenness.
Right.
There's no other societal issue that I can think of, Sean, where people are like, hey, yeah, death is a solution to that problem. And P.S., if you're affected by that, if you're a man or a woman, sweep that under the rug. Nobody wants to hear about that.
Yes. And on men, men are 4.5 times more likely. This is a study from Denmark of over 8,000 men, and it's based on socialized medicine. So it's not a voluntary study. Like this is just what happened based on the data. Over 8,000 men who have lost a child to abortion, and they found that they were up to 4.5 times more likely to seek mental health professionals, right? To seek psychiatric help if they lost a child to abortion. They are between 74 and 90, and it's because there's three different numbers, but between 74 and 90% higher likelihood of requiring prescription sleep aids, prescription antidepressants, and prescription anti-anxiety medicines. So it affects men, and there's more studies too, but that's just the easiest one to throw the data out because it's not men who are self-reporting, right? It's not pro-choice men or pro-life men. It's just dads who lost a child to abortion.
And I love that you're including those stats. The one from the Elliott Institute where it was talking about the suicide commitment rate for women. If people didn't see that come out earlier this year, that was a really important one. And it's not surprising to you or I that those kind of statistics somehow get overlooked in our scientific communities by and large in the mainstream media. I think it's always really telling when it's our side that is saying, look at this research. But I think when it comes to men and abortion, we can both agree that historically there's been a huge gap that has existed, and you're now a part of looking forward and trying to have some research. So is that anything we can talk about right now?
Yeah, for sure. I do want to touch on one thing you just talked about though, because it's really interesting data point, and that is that after Dr. Priscilla Coleman came out with her meta-analyses of 47 studies related to mental health and abortion in women. There is a doctor whose name is just I'm missing it right now, who is a pro-abortion side doctor who set out to do research on that to disprove, right, to prove the opposite. And in the end, he found that there is absolutely a connection between abortion and after abortion. And he dug into all kinds of things. So, I'll find the name of the doctor and I'll send it to you so that you can include it in the show notes. But he found there's absolutely a connection between having an abortion and after the abortion requiring mental health treatment, suicide, whatever that may be. And that's really like even the pro-abortion side can't find it. There's the Turnaway study, but we could do an entire episode on the Turnaway study and how broken it was for a study that was funded over $100 million, like with zero scientific methodology. So to your question, and I forgot what your question
about
was.
men and abortion, you are involved in some exciting things happening when it comes to men and abortion.
Yeah. So the Vitae Foundation. I'm
a board member, so I had to ask.
Okay, cool. Then I feel like you can give me the authority to talk a little about it. And what I'm about to talk about was just presented in DC. So they're still going through the data and they're still analyzing the data. But they're doing a study on men and abortion, and and they found they found a couple of interesting things. One was that the majority of the men, and I'll say I observed part of the study, so the majority of the men that I observed in this study would have preferred the baby to be born, but did not believe they had a voice, which is really important. In many cases, in almost every case, they believed the right thing to say was, "It's your body, your choice," right? Because that's what we've been conditioned as a society to say, and so
Well, and how interesting. I'm going to have you pause there, and I
yeah,
promise that I won't have either one of us forget where you were at. But I mean, it's really interesting, Sean, when you think about that, right, men, men by and large can identify that they knew that they were supposed to keep quiet. Yet when we look at women's experiences, women report that in a huge number, like pushing over 90% of women, identify that if someone would have said, "Hey, listen, you don't have to do this. I will support you." And especially if the man, right? So, I mean, here we see this like whole dichotomy between like men and women are under some interesting pressure from our
right,
society, and so they're walking out this dynamic that neither one of them are wanting that to go that direction.
right, and that I think that number is it's 86%, so close to 90% that of women, like if someone had supported them, then they would have chosen life. But no one supported them. And saying your body, your choice is is not supportive. That's the problem. Like we've been conditioned as a society to believe that that is the supportive thing for a man to say, when in the reality, it is the least supportive thing that a man can say, because what you're saying is the entire burden of this decision is on you. If I wanted to, like the woman is clearly going to think, if you wanted this baby, you would tell me. And since you're not telling me that, then you must not want it, but you're not telling me anything. So you're putting it all on me. And if you're putting all of this on me, then you're also likely to put all of everything else that comes after this on me, which increases that burden, right? Because then it becomes not just a choice about whether or not we have this baby, but am I going to be alone in this? If I'm going to be alone in this choice, then am I going to be alone at the birth? Am I going to be alone at all the hospital or doctor visits before the birth? Am I going to be alone at every doctor visit after the birth? Am I going to be alone financially? Am I going to be alone, relationally? Like, is this all going to be on me? Like, if you can't even tell me right now whether or not you want a baby, like, we're not talking about a cheeseburger, right? Like, if you can't tell me whether or not you want a baby, then are you a man that will ever be able to tell me whether or not you want anything? And it's really a failure of masculinity for men to say, your body, your choice. What you are saying is, as a man, you are saying, I am okay with you killing my child because I don't want to step on your toes, right? Like you're not a man. Like you're not a man if you can say, like, if you want to kill my kid, that's fine, but I'm gonna, it's up to you. Like that's not what men do. Like that is a failure of masculinity, and as a society as a whole, there's a lot of that, right? There's a lot of failed masculinity, and that's
What would you say to the listening audience who are saying, "Okay, right, I'm tracking you, Sean, but what do you suggest a young man say, right? And maybe is it age dependent? I don't know. This is your lane, not mine. But
yeah.
instead of, hey, right, your body, your choice, what do men say instead that is supportive?
Yeah. So if we think about, and this also comes from the Vitae Foundation's previous research, if you think about what are the woman's concerns at that point, the concerns are financially, the concerns are, whether or not they're going to be like alone in this, alone in raising the child, like how is is the entire burden going to be on me? That's basically the biggest concern. And so I think that the right thing for a man to say, you know, And I'll approach this first from, as a man, look, I'm completely transparent in that I take responsibility for the fact that my son died. Okay. Like, I was a part of that. Had I made better decisions, that situation wouldn't have happened. So I'm not a victim in this, right? So men are not victims. Men are obligated to take responsibility for our actions. And so, if we are going to do the things that create babies, then when a baby comes, that's the consequence of the action we chose to do. And so, knowing that, in addition to the fact that we're talking about a human that is attached to us with our DNA, this is our child, the right thing to say is, hey, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be here for you. You are not going to do this alone. Like, we are going to be able to get through this. We are going to be able to do this. I'm going to help you financially. I'm going to help you with my time. I'm going to put into this, and we're going to be able to do this, and you are not going to be alone. And I think that that speaks to the heart of the concern of the mom, and look, and I'll tell you from, I have a problem, is the easiest way to say it, with how I respond on social media, by meaning that I do it too much. And so many times in my posts or in my comments, the responses that I will get are, what about all the men that leave? So they recognize that this is the issue, right? Like, and it's so much bigger than this, because we can get into fatherlessness, right? Which is the easiest example to look at. Of course, women are scared. Look at all the fatherless homes, and that's a real issue that needs to be addressed. But we don't address fatherlessness by killing babies, right? We don't address any of the issues that you can bring up as to why women could be concerned by killing babies. We address the issues, because if all we do is kill the babies, those issues are still happening. And so if those are really the issues you're concerned about, then what's important is to pour into resolving those issues, not killing the baby, right? To kind of use an example, if I've got if I've got an issue with I'm not a medical person, so I'm just like, I'll use dental, because my wife's a dentist, right? If I have a toothache, but the reason I have a toothache is because I've got a piece of food stuck between my gum and my tooth, right? Then the solution is not to pull the tooth out, right? You don't pull the tooth, like, just fix the problem. She's going to kill me when she sees this, because she's actually a holistic dentist whose entire practice is based on finding the root cause and fixing it. And I'm coming up with the worst possible example. But, it was
but
better
it makes
than...
sense to me of like,
Yeah.
the actual solution is pretty common sense and quite simple. And yeah, to pull the whole tooth, that's a whole next level of misery and didn't solve the root problem.
Exactly. And so, or I have lung cancer, or it looks like I might get lung cancer because I'm dying, so I'm going to pull my lungs out. Like, stop smoking. I'm sorry. It looks like I'm going to get lung cancer because I'm smoking, so I'm going to pull my lungs out. Like, then I won't have lung cancer. That's true, but you won't have lungs. Like, you're killing yourself. Just quit smoking. Like, find the root cause and address the root cause. And so I think that's where the pro-abortion side gets hung up, is they don't care about the root cause. Like, they don't, by and large, their arguments are not real. They're based on defending killing babies by coming up with all of these other issues to distract from the fact that they're killing babies. And so, yeah,
And in the wake of that, right, Sean, they are in many ways alienating women from men, right? Pitting women against men, woman against child. And, what I'm hearing you say when you were talking about the comment section, I've experienced so much over the years of people who have such deep loss and grief, and they're angry. They're angry at men, right? Of like, where were you? Where are these men? Men don't care. And so that is like this underlying tension that exists, which is like men and women have been so deeply impacted by sex and abortion. And there's these deep chasms that have been built. And the abortion industry is like, yeah, we're just going to keep making that happen. And it takes like a level of healing and this cultural conversation to open up to say, man, can we talk about the elephant in the living room, which is men always wanted to be a part of this conversation, that men were told not to get involved. Like you weren't left, you weren't alienated, you were, right? I know that it feels that way, but a situation was created where men felt like we couldn't say anything. And now men are trying to heal. Men are trying to become magnets for other men to start to heal and create a space for this to change. But how do we go from where we were in the past to where we go in the future, and then deal with the folks in the comment section who are like, right? We've been alienated all this time. Men are the problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that men are tired of that, because it's not just in the abortion conversation, right? Men are the problem in everything. And I was actually listening yesterday morning to an interview with a lady named Nancy Percy is how I'm going to say it. And if I get her last name wrong, I apologize. She's a doctor who wrote a book called The Toxic War on Masculinity. And she traces it all the way back 100 years, right? Actually, she goes back to 1790, I think, in her data. So this is not solely on the abortion thing, right? It's just been this war on masculinity for however long, and the abortion side argument fits nicely into that box. You look at, they use the examples in that interview of Homer Simpson and and Peter Griffin from Family Guy, which are horrible examples because they're cartoon characters. But you can look at Tim Allen, in Home Improvement, just like dad man as or Al Bundy, like man as buffoon, right? And and that's just like subtle stuff, and the idea though is that that men have no place in the conversations. It's just gone so far. I'm not one that's going to say that the initial feminist movement was bad. I don't know enough about it. I think there were things that had to change. I think that if somebody hadn't stepped up and said something, then you would not be here right now interviewing me, right? Some things had to change. But then it just catapulted and went so far to where now it's not even, we're not even talking about that. Now it's about, because there was a patriarchy for thousands of years, now we have to reverse that to the fullest extreme, and men should just stay out of everything.
And men should be somehow feminized. I don't know if you caught this interview with Dana White recently. I was cooking. The epitome of womanhood. I think I was working in the kitchen when I caught Dana's interview, and the interviewer said something like, what would you say to all these people who talk about toxic masculinity? And Dana sort of paused, and he was like, toxic? Like, how can that be a thing? Like, there's no such thing as too much masculinity. And I was like, oh yeah, I can't wait to see how this turns out.
Right. And in his, in his field, that's true, right? It's a completely masculine thing. I think that it's not masculinity that's toxic. It's the absence of masculinity that's toxic. It's the absence of masculinity that has created so much problem in our society, the absence of men as protectors and providers, as leaders and servants, right? It is the idea that men are bad. And what I was getting to, I remember my thought on, connecting that book over the last couple hundred years, or 100 years, or however long that is, that the idea that men are tired. Men are tired of this. Like, we've gone from, okay, yeah, whatever, just kind of passively ignoring it, because we know it's not real. Like real men know that's not real. There's plenty of men who have been feminized to the point where they are going to be some of the first to stand up against men. But the men who have not bought into the lies have essentially just been sitting back and saying, yeah, okay, you can say whatever. I'm just going to keep trucking along because my job is to protect, provide, lead, and serve, and I'm going to do those things. And I can do it without your acknowledgement of me as a human, because I'm doing it not just for you, but I'm doing it for God, and I'm doing it for my family, and for my community. And so I'm just going to keep doing it. And men have finally gotten to the point where they're like, wait a minute, like, this is absurd. Like I'm tired. I'm tired of being the whipping boy, because and I'm talking about good men, right? I'm talking about men who aren't child abusers and wife beaters and whatever other example people want to use. Good men are just tired of it. And I think the same thing is happening in the pro-life movement. I think that men are ready, and I think it's something you touched on. They're looking for leadership. And I think from the young men, and you can see that in examples like Charlie Kirk, that they're looking for that leadership, and you can see it in older men, and I think of Nick Freitas. Like, I think that, his message and my message are very similar. He has just done a way better job, and he's been doing it for way longer than I have, of getting that platform out there, and and people are listening. Like people are listening to what he's saying on this because it resonates and it's real. Like, we're finally breaking through the idea that, as people who speak the truth, right, and that includes all of us, but on the issue of men, as people who speak the truth, it doesn't matter if people speak the lies or calling us names because they're clowns, right? And it doesn't matter. But now, like, the attack is so much stronger. Like, it was never enough for them that we just stay quiet and not interfere with what they're doing. Like we kept our head down and we just did what we needed to do, and that wasn't enough. Now they're coming stronger, and they're coming harder, and they're attacking, in different ways, and they're attacking our families, and they're attacking our children, and and it goes beyond the abortion industry. But I think that that men are tired of it, and they're standing up and they're speaking out, and man, I'll tell you, like the messaging that, especially if I can do a one-on-one or in a group setting, like when I talk about these things, like eyes get big, because people feel it. These men feel it, and they're like, yes, like this is what I've been feeling. And sometimes they're not the one that is positioned to be on the stage and say it, right? But they want to hear it, and that goes back to the whole idea of me sharing my abortion story, because sharing my abortion story helps other men to know that they're not alone. Sharing these truths about the need for men to be more active. One of the things that I say that really resonates with men and women, the women sometimes, cheer, they're like, you're damn right.
Yeah, I was going to clap a couple times today.
Yeah, but men, hear it and they're like, crap, I didn't think about that, and that is that, if we can agree that abortion is a spiritual war, and it is a spiritual war, the greatest tool of the devil is a separation of the union between God and man and woman, right? It started in the Garden of Eden, where the devil attacked Eve while Adam just stood there passively, failing in his own masculinity. And it has continued because that's the exact same thing that's happened in the abortion industry is we've got, we've gone from eat the apple, it's your mouth, it's your choice, right? You eat the apple, the consequences will be on you. But the consequences weren't just on Eve. The consequences were on all of humanity. Now we're at your body, your choice. You make the decision, you deal with the consequences. The consequences are not just on the mom, they're on all of society. And so we've gone from that point in this spiritual war. And if abortion is a spiritual war, and we can agree that 90% of the most active people in this pro-life movement are women, then have we as men consigned ourselves to sitting back and writing checks to fund a war that we send our women off to fight? And when men hear that, they're like, crap. Like, no, no. Like, that's not the man I want to be. What can I do? That's the question. Like, what can I do to become more active? And we as a pro-life movement need to work on being able to answer that question and provide more opportunities for men as we call them to action.
So let's talk about that as we close. What can men do, and what can they do with Men for Life to be more active?
Yeah. So the easiest thing, the easiest thing right now with what Men for Life is doing, what we're working on right now, and it's super exciting because it goes to the heart of everything we've been talking about, is creating or developing a fatherhood program for pregnancy centers to implement. One of the numbers I got from the Vitae Foundation was, I think it's pretty widely known that somewhere around 65% of women who see an ultrasound choose life. But one of the numbers that was shared with me recently is that 97% of men who see an ultrasound and go through a fatherhood program choose life. Okay. So this pregnancy centers are on this, right? They're getting the men in there for the ultrasound. The question that they've come to me with is, and it's hundreds, like probably 200. I know it was 104 in one day at a conference, asked me, how do we get the men back? And then the first question was, do you have a fatherhood program? How do we get the men back? And then how do we get men in our community to facilitate this program? And so it all goes to masculinity, right? Because the fatherhood programs that currently exist, by and large, are focused on the practical application of dad, right? Diapers, bottles, swaddling, things that are certainly important, but that you learn on the job. So if you're going to convince a 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old man who may or may not be in a stable relationship with this woman to come back, like, you got to give him something he needs, right? Give him something he wants. And not only did I not care about any of those things when I was 19, like, I have What to Expect When Expecting unopened on my bookshelf right now, and my youngest child is 6, right? Michelle's copy, which she got 2 because I was like, yeah, I'll read that with you. Her copy is like rabbit ear, dog ear. Yeah, exactly. And mine's like unopened. I don't even know why it's still there, except that it needed to be there for me to say this to you. So that's not what men want, right? But if we can serve them with a message that inspires them to authentic masculinity, if we can give them a message that they've never heard before, that they can be greater than what they're currently living for, and that message can come from a man who's also listening to them, and in many cases they've never had a man listen to them and their concerns, then we can get them back. And so our program is designed for the purpose of building the man and changing the man. For over the 12 weeks, we don't even talk about pregnancy until week 5, because if they're 6 to 10 weeks, on the day of the ultrasound, like at 15 weeks, you got time. Like, you're going to be fine. So we're talking about building the man, and rather than worrying about whether or not he can change a diaper in the hospital, we want a man who is so confident in his masculinity by the time that baby comes, that when that diaper explodes, he's not like, oh crap, I don't know what to do. Like,
right? He's like, I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm just going to change the diaper. It's just not, this is not something I had to go to a 12-week class on. And, to learn how to change diapers. And so that is the design of our program. And then gradually increasing in the biblical foundation of that, because it's so important. And through that, 3,000 pregnancy centers in this country, roughly, just for round numbers, if each one can reach 50 men a year, that's 150,000 men a year that we can build up this man, into someone who is life affirming by design, right? Because we've given him the ability to fulfill that masculine role that God created him to have. And so then the last question of how do we get men into to help with these programs is the easiest answer to how can men be active in the pro-life movement? Because if there's 3,000 pregnancy centers and they're each trying to reach 50 men a year, we need men who can facilitate these programs. And, and if the more men, the better, because most people have a job, right? And so unless a pregnancy center is fortunate enough to have the donations that allow it to hire a full-time fatherhood coordinator, and they're all trying, but, we don't need to be waiting around for that, then they need male volunteers. They need community. Even if they have a full-time fatherhood coordinator, they need a community of good men for these young men to be around, so that they can see what it's like, to live in authentic masculinity. And so the other thing that I use to call men to action is, if we as men can are sitting around and complaining that men in the younger generation suck, right? Like they have no idea what it means to be a man, but know that they didn't have a dad or they didn't have any masculine male role model, and refuse to fill that void, then we're failing in our own masculinity. That's part of our mission as men, is to help raise the next generation of men. And so that is the easiest way for men to get involved. So men who are listening, who are like, you know what? Like, I want to do something. Like, I've been waiting for somebody to tell me what I could do so that I can be active in the pro-life movement. Call your local pregnancy center. And look, today, you call them today, they might not have a fatherhood program, but you know what they will have after your phone call? They will have somebody who is willing to help, and they will have the knowledge and confidence that if they build a fatherhood program, there are people in their community who will help facilitate it so that they can make it successful.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. Excellent call to action. There is something concrete men can do today. Call your pregnancy center, find out if there's a fatherhood program. Make sure you get your name on the list, whether there is one or not, that you are someone who wants to be of help. And, if they want to find out more, Sean, about what you guys do at Men for Life, what's the easiest way for them to find you and follow you?
The easiest way for them to find Men for Life is menforlife.org. There is a contact us form that goes to an email address that I respond to. And I respond to every single one of them. So that's the easiest way. I'm not going to give my cell phone.
Right. And you guys put great content out on social media.
Yes. So you can follow us on, my personal, because sometimes my message is about masculinity that isn't directly related to the pro-life movement. And so I don't include Men for Life's page on that. So my personal Instagram is all the social medias. My personal is L Sean Corcoran, so LSEANCORCORAN, and then Men for Life on all the social media platforms is NTL, like national, NTL Men for Life.
Perfect. Well, Sean, I just thank you for, sharing a very vulnerable personal story, but also really, challenging both women and men to think about masculinity in a new way, and how that intersection of masculinity does impact abortion and even the pro-life movement. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate this opportunity.
And thank you to the listening audience for tuning in for this episode of Life Beyond Abortion. I have no doubt that Sean's experiences and his wisdom probably challenged you in many ways, gave you a lot of information, statistics to think about. So do yourself a favor. like and follow this podcast, Life Beyond Abortion. Be sure to follow Sean and the team at Men for Life, and really challenge yourself to even visit their website and find out more about fatherhood and how you can be a part of this incredible call to action.
Life Beyond Abortion is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions on the show are those of the host and her guest, and not necessarily those of the Herzog Foundation. You can find out more about Melissa's work at melissaohden.com or by following her on Instagram at Melissa Ohden. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode of Life Beyond Abortion.